In the violent summer of 1878, a gang of ruthless outlaws decided to terrorize what seemed to be just another humble saloonkeeper in the town of Shadow Creek. They had no idea that the quiet man serving drinks was once the most feared sharpshooter in the Union Army, a man who could hit a dime from 100 yards away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The dusty town of Shadow Creek hadn't seen a new business open in years, not since the silver mines started drying up. So when Thomas Blackwood rode in with a wagon full of furniture and liquor barrels, folks couldn't help but notice. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town's main street as he pulled up to the abandoned Golden Eagle Saloon, its weathered sign creaking in the hot summer breeze. Thomas was a man in his early 40s with graying temples and eyes that seemed to look right through you. His movements were precise, deliberate, like a man who'd spent years making sure every action counted. The locals watching him unload his wagon would never have guessed that those steady hands had once held a rifle for General Sherman's army, or that he'd earned the nickname Deadeye during the war for hitting targets other sharpshooters claimed impossible. The town's few remaining merchants peeked through dusty windows as Thomas methodically unloaded his wagon. Maria Delgado, a Mexican barmaid who worked at the only other saloon in town, crossed herself as she hurried past. Thomas noticed how she quickened her pace when she passed the alley leading to the north side of town. It told him everything he needed to know about where the real power in Shadow Creek lay. Sheriff Marcus Riley was the first to approach him, thumbs hooked in his gun belt, badge gleaming suspiciously bright against his worn leather vest. "Mighty brave opening a saloon in these parts," he drawled, watching as Thomas carried another barrel inside. "Especially with the current situation." "Just looking for a quiet place to settle down," Thomas replied, not missing a beat in his work. The sheriff's badge might have been polished, but Thomas noticed the man's nervous eyes, the way they kept darting toward the north end of town. Deputy James Hayes lingered in the background, his young face already showing the strain of serving in a town where the law held little real authority. What the sheriff didn't say, but what everyone knew, was that Shadow Creek had become a battleground between two rival gangs. The Reeves gang controlled the north side, led by Victor the Viper Reeves, a man who'd killed his way to power across 3 territories. The south belonged to Duke Morrison's boys, former Confederate soldiers who'd turned to robbery after the war, their bitterness finding outlet in violence. As Thomas worked through the evening, setting up his bar and arranging bottles, the town's undertaker, Old Pete, shuffled in. His crooked spine and gravedigger's hands spoke of years burying the victims of Shadow Creek's endless feuds. "Might want to order extra glasses," the old man said with a wheezing laugh. "They tend to break when the boys get rowdy. Last saloonkeeper, poor soul, went through 3 sets before they put him in the ground." Thomas just nodded, continuing his methodical organization. He'd chosen this town carefully, knowing its reputation. What nobody knew was that he hadn't come to Shadow Creek by chance. 3 months ago, he'd read about a massacre at Fort Collins, where both gangs had turned a peaceful settlement into a bloodbath. Among the dead was his younger brother, James, who'd been passing through with his wife and young son. The newspapers called it a tragedy. Thomas called it a reason. Frank Davidson, the local gunsmith, stopped by next, ostensibly to sell some cleaning supplies. "Strange time to be opening a business," he mentioned, eyes studying Thomas's movements with professional interest, "especially in the dead zone between territories." Thomas bought the supplies without haggling, noting how Davidson's calloused hands showed the same gunpowder stains as his own. The town doctor, Sarah Winchester, was his last visitor that evening. She was a striking woman with amber eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, carrying her medical bag like a shield. The war had brought her west, like so many others, but unlike them, she'd stayed to help where she could. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, setting a bottle of medicinal alcohol on his counter, "consider this a welcome gift, though I suspect you'll be needing more than spirits to survive here." Before Thomas could respond, the sound of hooves thundered outside. Billy, Quick Draw Carter, Reeves' notorious enforcer, burst through the saloon doors with 3 of his men. They were drunk, dangerous, and looking for trouble. Carter had a reputation for shooting men just to watch them fall, and the twin Colts on his hips had notched more kills than most soldiers saw in the war. Well, well, Carter sneered, spitting tobacco juice onto Thomas's freshly swept floor. Looks like we got ourselves a new neighbor. Boys, let's show him how we welcome folks to the north side of town. Thomas stood behind his bar, calm as still water. His right hand rested beneath the counter, where an old Remington 1875 hung in a custom holster. The same gun he'd used at Gettysburg, though these men didn't know that, not yet. The real trouble in Shadow Creek was about to begin, and with it a reckoning that had been years in the making. The evening shadows had grown longer, casting the saloon in amber light filtering through dusty windows. The few townsfolk who'd gathered to watch Thomas unload his wagon had long since disappeared behind locked doors and drawn curtains. They knew what usually followed when Billy, Quick Draw Carter and his men paid a visit to a new establishment. Carter's spurs jingled against the wooden floor as he approached the bar, his men spreading out behind him like wolves circling prey. The lamplight caught the silver inlay of his revolvers. Weapons more for show than practicality, Thomas noted. A real gunman's tools were worn, well used like the Remington under Thomas's counter. Our protection doesn't come cheap, Carter drawled, running a finger along the polished bar top. But then again, neither does a funeral. His men laughed, the sound echoing off the empty walls of the saloon. Thomas kept wiping glasses, his movements unhurried. Seems to me, he said quietly, a man ought to earn what he takes. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Carter's face darkened. In one fluid motion, he drew his right-hand Colt and swept a row of bottles off the bar. Glass shattered, whiskey pooling on the floor. Earn it? He snarled. Like this. The crash brought Sarah Winchester running from her clinic next door. She appeared in the doorway, medical bag in hand, but froze when she saw the scene unfolding. Thomas caught her eye and gave an imperceptible shake of his head. She stayed put, one hand gripping the doorframe. That's $50 worth of spirits, Thomas said, still calm. Plus another $50 for the cleanup. His voice carried the same tone he'd used calling shots at Gettysburg, measuring distance, calculating angles. Carter leaned forward, tobacco-stained teeth bared in a grin. Or what? You'll serve us warm beer? His left hand dropped to his other holster. Maybe I should show you what happened to the last fellow who thought he could. The movement was so fast, none of Carter's men saw it happen. One moment, Thomas was behind the bar. The next, Carter's gun hand was pinned to the wooden surface, Thomas's grip like an iron vise. The Remington had appeared, as if by magic, its barrel pressed under Carter's jaw. 3 things, Thomas said softly. First, you'll pay for the damage. Second, you'll apologize to the lady for disrupting her evening. Third, you'll tell Victor Reeves that Thomas Blackwood sends his regards. Carter's men reached for their guns, but Thomas's next words stopped them cold. I can put a bullet through your boss's throat and take 2 of you before you clear the leather. The other 2 might get me. Might not. Want to gamble? The saloon fell silent except for Carter's ragged breathing. Thomas could smell the fear starting to roll off him. Not the first time he'd scented it on a man staring down his barrel. $100, Carter managed, his Adam's apple bobbing against the gun. For the bottles. And... Sorry, ma'am, he called out to Sarah, voice cracking. Thomas released him, the Remington disappearing as smoothly as it had appeared. Carter stumbled back, rubbing his wrist, hatred burning in his eyes. This ain't over, he spat. No, Thomas agreed. It isn't. After they left, Sarah rushed in. Are you insane? She demanded, checking his hands for injury. Those men will be back with Reeves himself. Counting on it, Thomas replied, starting to clean up the broken glass. He paused, seeing her expression. Dr. Winchester? Sarah, she corrected automatically. Sarah, there are times when a wound needs to be opened before it can heal properly. You know that better than most. She studied him for a long moment. You're not just some saloonkeeper, are you? Thomas's response was interrupted. by Old Pete shuffling in, followed by Frank Davidson. "Word travels fast in Shadow Creek," Davidson said, his gunsmith's eyes noting the residue of violence, especially when it involves someone standing up to the Reeves gang. "Or someone with a death wish," Old Pete added cheerfully. "Should I start measuring you now, or wait till morning?" Thomas's mouth twitched. "Might want to save your tape for the visitors I'm expecting." He reached under the counter and pulled out a bottle of the good whiskey, the kind he'd kept hidden from Carter's gang. Meanwhile, it seems to me Shadow Creek could use a proper drink. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Word of Thomas Blackwood's confrontation with Carter's gang spread through Shadow Creek like wildfire. By noon the next day, the Golden Eagle Saloon had more customers than it had seen in years. Locals came not just for drinks, but to glimpse the man who'd stood up to Billy Quick Draw Carter and lived to tell about it. Thomas served them with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown the night before, noting how they clustered in small groups, voices low, eyes darting to the doors whenever shadows passed the windows. Maria Delgado had slipped in early, taking a corner table where she could watch the room. Her presence told Thomas more than any gossip could. She wouldn't risk being seen here unless she thought the power balance in Shadow Creek was about to shift. "Quite the crowd," Sarah Winchester observed, sliding onto a bar stool. She'd traded her formal doctor's attire for a simpler dress, but Thomas noticed the bulge of a derringer pocket sewn into her skirt. "Though I suspect they're not all here for your whiskey." "People drink for different reasons," Thomas replied, pouring her a small glass of bourbon. "Fear, curiosity." He paused, meeting her eyes. "Anticipation." Sarah's fingers traced the rim of her glass. "I treated Carter's wrist this morning. Nasty sprain." Her lips curved slightly. "I may have been a bit heavy-handed with the splint." Before Thomas could respond, Frank Davidson burst through the doors, face flushed with exertion. "Riders coming in from the north," he announced. "At least 20 of them. Reeves himself at the lead." The saloon fell silent. Then came the scraping of chairs, as patrons hurried to leave, none wanting to be caught in what was coming. Thomas noticed Deputy Hayes among them, badges apparently offering no protection against the approaching storm. "You should go," Thomas told Sarah, but she shook her head. "My clinic's next door. These situations usually end with patients one way or another." Thomas nodded, respecting her courage. He began clearing the bar of valuable bottles, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. "Quite a welcome committee you've gathered, Mr. Blackwood," came a smooth voice from the doorway. Victor the Viper. Reeves stood there, dressed in an elegant black coat despite the heat. Unlike Carter's showy weapons, Reeves carried a simple Colt Army revolver in a well-worn holster. His eyes, cold and gray as winter storm clouds, surveyed the room. "Word travels fast," Thomas replied, continuing to arrange his bottles. "Indeed." Reeves stepped inside, followed by Carter and several hard-looking men. Though some words travel faster than others, like a name. Thomas Deadeye Blackwood. He smiled, showing perfect white teeth. The Union Army's finest marksman, the man who could shoot the flame off a candle at 100 yards. Thomas set down the bottle he was holding. "That was a long time ago." "Was it? I heard you were at Antietam." Reeves's voice hardened. "The day my brother died." "Your brother led a cavalry charge against our position," Thomas said quietly. "He was brave. Foolish, but brave. He was 17. Reeves's hand rested on his gun. "Did you know that when you pulled the trigger?" The saloon had emptied except for Sarah, still at the bar, and Maria in her corner. Even Carter and his men had backed away, sensing what was coming. "I knew," Thomas answered. "Just like I knew he'd killed 3 of my men before I took the shot. War makes children into killers, Mr. Reeves. Then peace turns killers into businessmen." He gestured at Reeves's fine coat. "Or gang leaders." "Is that why you're here?" Reeves asked. "To finish what war started?" "I'm here because your war with Morrison's gang killed my brother 3 months ago," Fort Collins massacre. He was passing through with his wife and son. Thomas's voice remained level, but his eyes had turned hard as gunmetal. Just travelers in the wrong place at the wrong time. Reeves nodded slowly. Ah, now we come to it. You want revenge? No. Thomas's denial caught everyone by surprise. I want justice. There's a difference. And what justice would that be? You and Morrison are going to end this feud. Leave Shadow Creek in peace, or I'm going to kill you both. The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. Then Reeves smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. We'll see. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Blackwood? The next time we meet, I won't be so diplomatic. After they left, Sarah let out a breath she'd been holding. Well, that was intense. It's going to get worse, Maria said, speaking for the first time. She approached the bar, glancing nervously at the door. Morrison's men are in town too. They've been watching. Waiting. Thomas poured 3 drinks. Then it's starting sooner than I expected. He raised his glass. To justice. Sarah picked up her glass. To survive. Maria took hers with a trembling hand. To Shadow Creek. What's left of it. As they drank, Thomas could hear the wind picking up outside, carrying the promise of a storm. In more ways than one, he thought, dark clouds were gathering over Shadow Creek. As dusk settled over Shadow Creek, Duke Morrison sat in his study at the south end of town. A telegram spread before him. The yellow paper bore a simple message. Blackwood in town. War record confirmed. Approach with caution. Morrison crumpled the paper, his weathered face creased with thought. What do you make of it? He asked the man standing by the window. Colonel James Hampton, Morrison's right-hand man since their Confederate cavalry days, turned from his watch position. Man's got nerve, I'll give him that, Hampton drawled, his gray beard catching the lamplight. Taking on both sides at once. Either he's crazy or he's exactly what his reputation claims, Morrison finished. He stood walking to a cabinet where an old cavalry saber hung. You remember Antietam, James? The way our charges kept failing? Hampton nodded slowly. Union sharpshooters, picking off officers at impossible distances. His hand unconsciously touched the scar on his neck. That was him? That was him. Deadeye Blackwood, the man who broke Pickett's charge before it even began. Morrison's fingers traced the saber's blade. Now he's here, threatening both me and Reeves. What's your play? Morrison turned, his Confederate gray eyes hard as flint. Send word to our men. I want eyes on that saloon round the clock, and get me everything you can on his brother, the one killed at Fort Collins. You think that's what brought him here? A man like Blackwood doesn't retire to a war zone by chance. Morrison strapped on his gun belt, checking the loads in his Remington. And while Victor Reeves might have forgotten what war really looks like, I haven't. Across town, Thomas was closing up the Golden Eagle when Frank Davidson slipped in through the back door. The gunsmith's face was grave. Morrison's men are setting up watching posts, Davidson reported, accepting the whiskey Thomas offered. 3 teams of 2, rotating shifts, professional work. Thomas nodded, counting bottles for his inventory. Military precision, old habits die hard. That's not all, Davidson continued, lowering his voice though they were alone. I heard from a friend in Fort Collins about your brother's death. Thomas's hands stilled on the bottle he was holding. Go on. It wasn't just random violence. James was carrying something. Papers, from what I hear. Something both gangs wanted badly enough to turn the town into a battlefield. The bottle in Thomas's hands cracked, a thin line appearing in the glass. What kind of papers? Land deeds, railway routes, the kind of documents that could give one side control of every supply line from here to Mexico. Davidson leaned forward. Your brother wasn't just passing through, was he? Before Thomas could answer, Sarah burst in through the front door, her medical bag clutched tight. Thomas, Maria's been shot. They found the barmaid in the alley behind the competing saloon, blood seeping through her dress. Thomas cradled her head while Sarah worked to stem the bleeding. Who did this? Thomas asked softly. Both of them, Maria gasped. Morrison's men saw me talking to Reeves's lookouts, but Reeves's men they shot first, thinking I was... She coughed, blood staining her lips. Don't try to talk, Sarah commanded, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Thomas, I need light. Davidson produced a match illuminating Sarah's grim work. In the flickering light, Thomas could see the Phoeboth. Both of them, Maria gasped. Morrison's men saw me talking to Reeves's lookouts, but Reeves's men, they shot first, thinking I was... She coughed, blood staining her lips. Don't try to talk, Sarah commanded, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Thomas, I need light. Davidson are in Maria's eyes. Not of death, but of something else. The papers, Maria whispered. Your brother. He trusted me too. Shh, Thomas soothed, but she grabbed his collar with surprising strength. In the church, under the third pew, from the back. Her grip weakened. I'm sorry. I couldn't. Stay with us, Sarah urged, but Thomas could see it was too late. Maria's eyes had gone distant, fixed on some point far beyond Shadow Creek's petty wars. They buried her that night, in the small cemetery behind the church. Old Pete had dug the grave without being asked, his usual gallows humor absent for once. Town's choosing sides, Davidson observed as they walked back. Soon, there won't be any neutral ground left. There never was, Thomas replied. He looked at Sarah, who hadn't spoken since pronouncing Maria dead. Doctor, I think it's time you left town. She met his gaze steadily. My father said the same thing at Gettysburg. I stayed then too. This isn't a war, isn't it? Her hand touched his arm. You're planning something. Something that started before Maria's death. Thomas was silent for a long moment, watching the stars emerge above Shadow Creek. Finally, he said, Come by the saloon at midnight. Both of you. There are things you need to know. Decisions to be made. As they parted ways, Thomas could feel the weight of her cross pressing against his chest where he wore it under his shirt. A gift from another woman who'd been caught between two forces beyond her control. He touched it briefly, a soldier's gesture that was half prayer, half promise. The time for playing both sides was over. Shadow Creek's reckoning was about to begin. The church bell struck midnight as Sarah and Davidson approached the Golden Eagle. Thomas was waiting at the back door, Remington holstered but close at hand. The town had grown eerily quiet, even the usual drunken carousing silenced by the tension in the air. Inside, Thomas had cleared the bar except for 3 glasses and a lamp burning low. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his vest, yellowed, creased, stained with what might have been blood. Davidson are in Maria's eyes, not of death, but of something else. The papers, Maria whispered. Your brother. He trusted me to... Shh, Thomas soothed, but she grabbed his collar with surprising strength. In the church, under the third pew, from the back. Her grip weakened. I'm sorry. I couldn't. Stay with us, Sarah urged, but Thomas could see it was too late. Maria's eyes had gone distant, fixed on some point far beyond Shadow Creek's petty wars. They buried her that night, in the small cemetery behind the church. Old Pete had dug the grave without being asked, his usual gallows humor absent for once. Town's choosing sides, Davidson observed as they walked back. Soon there won't be any neutral ground left. There never was, Thomas replied. He looked at Sarah, who hadn't spoken since pronouncing Maria dead. Doctor, I think it's time you left town. She met his gaze steadily. My father said the same thing at Gettysburg. I stayed then too. This isn't a war. Isn't it? Her hand touched his arm. You're planning something. Something that started before Maria's death. Thomas was silent for a long moment, watching the stars emerge above Shadow Creek. Finally, he said, "Come by the saloon at midnight. Both of you. There are things you need to know. Decisions to be made." As they parted ways, Thomas could feel the weight of her cross pressing against his chest where he wore it under his shirt. A gift from another woman who'd been caught between two forces beyond her control. He touched it briefly, a soldier's gesture that was half prayer, half promise. The time for playing both sides was over. Shadow Creek's reckoning was about to begin. The church bell struck midnight as Sarah and Davidson approached the Golden Eagle. Thomas was waiting at the back door, Remington holstered but close at hand. The town had grown eerily quiet, even the usual drunken carousing silenced by the tension in the air. Inside, Thomas had cleared the bar except for 3 glasses and a lamp burning low. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his vest, yellowed, creased, stained with what might have been blood. "My brother wasn't just passing through Fort Collins," he began, spreading the paper on the bar. It was a map, showing railway lines both existing and planned with handwritten notes in the margins. He was carrying information, the kind that could shift the balance of power in these territories. Davidson studied the map, his gunsmith's hands tracing the lines. These railway routes, they'd control everything: supply lines, silver shipments, cattle drives. And more importantly, Sarah added, her quick mind connecting the pieces, they'd control which towns live and which die, like Shadow Creek. Thomas nodded. The railway's coming. Question is, where exactly will it run? These documents prove that both Morrison and Reeves have been bribing railway officials, trying to ensure the line favors their territories. That's why they turned Fort Collins into a bloodbath, Davidson realized. Your brother had evidence of their corruption. James was working for the Railway Commission, Thomas confirmed, pouring 3 fingers of whiskey for each of them. Investigating both gangs. He knew it was dangerous, so he split up the documents. Some he kept with him, others he entrusted to people along his route. People like Maria. Sarah's eyes widened. The papers in the church. Morrison's men are watching the front of the church, Davidson warned. Reeves probably has the back covered. That's why I need your help. Thomas leaned forward, his voice low. Sarah, you can enter the church without suspicion. Everyone knows you tend to the sick there. Davidson, you'll create a distraction at your shop. A small fire, nothing dangerous, but enough to draw their attention. And you? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. I'll get the papers. But first, Thomas pulled out another document, this one newer. I need witnesses for this. It was a letter to the Railway Commission, detailed and damning. It laid out both gangs' corruption, their violence, the innocent lives lost in their war for control. At the bottom was a blank space for signatures. Your testimony would make this official, Thomas explained. Give the commission cause to send in federal marshals. End this once and for all. Davidson picked up a pen without hesitation. About time someone stood up to them. He signed with a flourish. Sarah studied Thomas's face. This was never about revenge, was it? Justice wears many faces, Doctor. He offered her the pen. Sometimes it looks like revenge, sometimes like redemption. She signed. Tomorrow night, Thomas said, rolling up both documents carefully. When the moon is high. Morrison's men will be distracted. I've arranged for some of their horses to be spooked. Reeves's watchers have a weakness for certain drinks that will be stronger than usual. That still leaves a lot that could go wrong, Davidson observed. Everything that matters carries risk, Thomas replied. He touched the cross under his shirt, Maria's cross now, a reminder of the price of standing aside. But sometimes, the bigger risk is doing nothing. As if to punctuate his words, gunshots erupted from the north side of town. They rushed to the window to see flames beginning to rise from one of Morrison's warehouses. "Reeves is making his move," Davidson said grimly. "No," Thomas corrected, his experienced eye taking in the pattern of the attack. "This is something else. The shots are too precise, too coordinated." Sarah gripped his arm. "The Railway Commission? They wouldn't move without evidence." Thomas strapped on his gun belt. "This is someone else. Someone who knows what's coming and wants to get ahead of it." More shots rang out, closer now. In the firelight, they could see figures moving through the streets with military precision. "We need to get those papers," Thomas said urgently. "Tonight, before whoever this is tears the town apart looking for them." Davidson checked his own weapon. "I'll get the fire started at my shop, give you 15 minutes, maybe 20. Sarah squared her shoulders. "I'll head to the church now. It won't seem strange for the doctor to check on people during the fighting." Thomas caught her hand before she could leave. "Sarah, thank you, both of you." She smiled, brief but genuine. "Just make it count." As they separated into the chaos-filled night, Thomas felt the weight of years, of war, of loss, of choices made and prices paid, settling onto his shoulders. But for the first time since James's death, that weight felt like purpose instead of burden. Shadow Creek's day of reckoning had arrived early, and this time, he was ready. Gunfire lit up Shadow Creek's streets like lightning, casting sharp shadows against burning buildings. Thomas moved through the chaos with practiced stealth, keeping to the darkened alleys. The mystery attackers had split the town into sectors, their coordinated movement suggesting military training. Through the smoke, he caught glimpses of unfamiliar men in dark clothes. No badges, no identifying marks. Professional manhunters, he guessed, or Pinkerton agents. Either way, they were methodically searching buildings looking for something, or someone. A bullet whined past his head, embedding itself in a wooden post. Thomas dropped and rolled, drawing his Remington in one fluid motion. Two shadows detached themselves from a doorway. Morrison's men, but moving with unusual desperation. "Hold it right there, Blackwood," one called out, voice shaking. "Boss wants to talk." "About the papers?" Thomas kept his gun steady. "Or about James?" "About survival." The second man stepped forward, moonlight revealing a face Thomas recognized, one of the Fort Collins survivors. "Those aren't railway men out there. There's something worse." Before Thomas could respond, precise rifle fire cut down both men. The shots came from the church tower, a position that should have been impossible to reach unnoticed. "Damn," Thomas muttered, breaking into a run as more shots followed his movement. Whoever these new players were, they had professionals in their ranks, the kind of men who thought like him. He found Sarah crouched behind the church steps, her medical bag clutched tight. "They're everywhere," she whispered. "Moving like soldiers, but not the army. They shot Reverend Kane when he tried to ring the warning bell." "The papers?" "Still inside. Third pew from the back, like Maria said." She grabbed his arm. "Thomas, I heard them talking. They mentioned something about Operation Quicksilver and a Master Carter." Thomas felt his blood run cold. William Carter, Billy's father. The crime boss from Chicago? The one who owns half the railways already. Thomas checked his ammunition. James must have found evidence connecting him to both gangs. No wonder they want those papers so badly. An explosion rocked the north end of town, Davidson's distraction. Through the smoke, they could see Morrison's men falling back, exchanging fire with the dark-clothed attackers. Reeves's gang was nowhere to be seen. "Now's our chance," Thomas said. "Stay close." They slipped into the church through a side door. The interior was dark except for moonlight filtering through stained glass, casting colored shadows across empty pews. The Reverend's body lay crumpled by the bell rope, a testament to the attacker's ruthlessness. Sarah knelt by the third pew, while Thomas kept watch. Her fingers found a loose board, then a packet wrapped in oilskin. "Got it!" A slow clap echoed through the church. "Well done, Dr. Winchester." Victor Reeves stepped from behind the altar, flanked by his men. "I'll take those papers now." "This isn't your fight anymore, Reeves," Thomas warned, positioning himself between Sarah and the gang leader. "Carter's men will kill everyone who knows about these documents." "You think I know that?" Reeves laughed bitterly. "Why do you think I've been trying to buy my way out? The railway contracts, the protection money. All of it was to get enough leverage to escape Carter's grip." More footsteps approached from behind, Morrison and his men boxing them in. The Confederate veteran's face was streaked with soot. "He's right, Reeves. We both played. Carter's been pulling our strings from the start. And now he's cutting them," Thomas finished, "along with any loose ends." A new voice rang out from the gallery. "Quite right, Mr. Blackwood." A tall figure in an expensive suit emerged, surrounded by professional gunmen. "Though I prefer to think of it as corporate consolidation." William Carter, the Chicago crime lord himself, smiled down at them like a banker foreclosing on a widow's home. "Now, about those papers." Thomas's mind raced, calculating angles, distances, possibilities. Sarah's hand found his passing something metal, a derringer, small but deadly at close range. Outside, Davidson's fire was spreading, casting hellish light through the windows. Shadow Creek's power struggle had just become something far deadlier than a simple gang war, and Thomas Blackwood, former sharpshooter turned saloonkeeper, found himself at the center of a web that stretched from Chicago to Mexico. The night was about to become very interesting indeed. The church's stained glass windows shattered as more of Carter's men rappelled down from the roof, their dark clothes and professional movements marking them as former military. Thomas counted at least 8 new threats, plus Carter himself, and whatever forces waited outside. "I'll make this simple," Carter Sr. called down, his Chicago accent strange in the frontier church. "The papers, your silence, and you all Wayne self, and whatever forces waited outside." "I'll make this simple," Carter Sr. called down, his Chicago accent strange in the frontier church. "The papers, your silence, and yoke away. Resist, and my men will paint these holy walls with your blood." "Like you did in Fort Collins," Thomas's voice carried to the rafters. "How many innocent people died to keep your railway empire secret?" "Business requires sacrifice, Mr. Blackwood. Surely a military man understands that." Morrison stepped forward, his Confederate pride bristling. "We're not your employees anymore, Carter. This is our territory." "Your territory?" Carter laughed. "Everything from Chicago to Mexico belongs to me. You're just the local management. Easily replaced." Thomas felt Sarah press against his back, both of them scanning for escape routes. The derringer was a comforting weight in his palm, but against these odds it wouldn't make much difference. Then he saw it. Davidson's fire had reached the livery stable. The dry wood was catching fast, and the winter's hay storage would go up like gunpowder. "Reeves," Thomas said quietly, "remember Antietam? The fog that saved your brother's first charge?" The gang leader's eyes narrowed, then widened in understanding. He'd seen the spreading fire too. "Now, Mr. Blackwood," Carter called impatiently. "The papers." Thomas raised the oilskin packet slowly. "You want them? Catch." He hurled the package toward the gallery, but not at Carter. The papers sailed through a broken window, landing on the burning stable's roof. Chaos erupted. Carter's men fired, but Reeves and Morrison had already drawn on them, years of mutual hatred temporarily forgotten in the face of a common enemy. Sarah's derringer barked twice, dropping a man trying to flank them. "The stable!" Thomas shouted as flames began consuming the papers. "It's going to—" The explosion rocked Shadow Creek like a cannon blast. The livery stable's hay stores went up in a fireball, sending burning debris through the church's windows. Smoke filled the sanctuary as old, dry wood caught fire. "Kill them all!" Carter screamed, his sophisticated facade cracking. "Find those papers!" But Thomas had already pulled Sarah behind the altar, where a trap door led to the church's root cellar. They dropped down just as Morrison's men opened up with a Winchester repeater, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. "The papers," Sarah gasped as they crawled through the cellar. "All that evidence?" "Were copies," Thomas finished. "The originals are still in my saloon safe. James taught me to always keep backups." They emerged from the cellar's external door into smoke-filled chaos. Davidson was waiting with horses, his face streaked with soot. "The town's going up," he reported. "Carter's men are shooting anyone who tries to flee." "Get Sarah out of here," Thomas ordered, checking his Remington. "Take the mountain trail east. There's a railway commission office in Fort Henry." "What about you?" Sarah grabbed his arm. "Someone has to slow them down. Give you time to get those papers to people who can use them." "That's suicide," Davidson protested. Thomas smiled grimly. "Maybe, but I didn't come here to survive. I came for justice." He pressed a key into Sarah's hand. "Safe's behind the bar, under the floorboards. The papers prove everything. Carter's bribes, the murders, all of it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "Make them pay." "For James," Thomas nodded. "For Maria. For everyone they've buried in their climb to power." As Sarah and Davidson galloped away, Thomas turned back toward the burning church. Through the smoke, he could see Carter's men spreading out, searching for survivors. Morrison and Reeves's gangs had vanished into the night, their brief alliance already forgotten. Thomas checked his ammunition one last time. The weight of Maria's cross reminded him of all the debts still to be paid. The time for hiding behind a saloonkeeper's apron was over. Deadeye Blackwood had one last mission to complete. Thomas moved through the burning town like a ghost, using the smoke for cover. Years of military training took over. Every shadow became potential cover, every sound a signal. He made his way to the Golden Eagle, knowing Carter's men would search it eventually. Inside, the saloon was eerily quiet. Thomas retrieved his old cavalry rifle from behind the bar, a weapon he'd hoped never to use again. Its long barrel and scope had earned him his nickname at Antietam. Tonight, it would earn him something else. From the saloon's second floor, he had clear lines of sight to most of the street. Carter's men were moving in teams of 3, professional but predictable. Thomas settled into position, controlling his breathing just as he had on countless battlefields. The first shot caught a team leader in the chest. Before his companions could react, a second round found its mark. The third man dove for cover, but Thomas had already shifted position. "Sniper!" The cry went up through Carter's ranks. "Second floor of the saloon!" Thomas smiled grimly. Let them come. He'd prepared for this, laying out ammunition at key points throughout the building. As Carter's men attempted to surround the saloon, he picked them off one by one. Each shot was deliberate, each target chosen to create maximum confusion. "Damn you, Blackwood," Carter's voice carried through the smoke. "There's no escape." The whole town's surrounded. Thomas's response was another precisely placed shot that sent Carter diving behind a water trough. He counted his remaining ammunition, enough for what needed to be done. Movement caught his eye. Morrison emerging from an alley, leading a counterattack against Carter's men. The old Confederate had found his courage at last. On the other side of town, Reeves's gang was engaging another group of Carter's forces. "Like rats in a trap," Thomas muttered, picking off a Carter man trying to flank Morrison's position. The town's original power struggle had reignited, but with a desperate edge. Everyone knew there was no going back to the old arrangements. A bullet splintered the window frame beside him. Billy Quick-Draw Carter had joined his father's men, his silver-plated revolvers flashing in the firelight. Thomas shifted position again, but not before noting the younger Carter's reckless charge toward the saloon. More shots rang out. Sarah and Davidson hadn't gotten far enough away. Carter's men were pursuing them. Thomas had to buy them more time. He made his way to the saloon's roof, crawling through thick smoke. From this vantage point, he could see the entire battlefield Shadow Creek had become. Carter's men were pressing in from all sides, but the combined resistance of Morrison and Reeves's gangs was holding them back. Thomas set up his final position. The cavalry rifle's scope gleamed dully in the firelight. One by one, he began taking shots at Carter's key lieutenants. Each round found its mark with deadly precision. "That's enough." William Carter stepped into the open street using his own son as a shield. "Face me like a man, Blackwood. Or are you only brave behind that scope?" Thomas considered the shot, difficult but not impossible, just like at Antietam, when Reeves's brother had led that doomed charge. But before he could squeeze the trigger, an explosion rocked the saloon's foundation. Carter's men had planted dynamite while he was focused on the street. The building began to collapse. Thomas grabbed his rifle and ran for the edge of the roof. Below, Billy Carter waited with drawn guns, eager to prove himself against the legendary Deadeye Blackwood. Time seemed to slow as Thomas leaped from the burning building. His rifle came up, muscle memory taking over. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Shadow Creek was about to witness its deadliest showdown yet. Time crystallized in that moment above Shadow Creek. Thomas's cavalry rifle barked once as Billy Carter's revolvers flashed below. 2 shots split the night, one rising, one falling. Thomas hit the ground rolling, his shoulder taking the impact. Billy Carter stood frozen, his silver guns still raised. Then a small red flower bloomed on his chest, directly over his heart. He looked almost surprised as he toppled backward. "Billy!" William Carter's anguished scream cut through the chaos. His son had just joined the long list of young men Deadeye Blackwood had sent to early graves. Thomas ignored the burning in his side where Billy's shot had grazed him. He dove behind an overturned wagon as Carter's remaining men opened fire. Through gaps in the wagon's boards, he could see Morrison's gang pressing their advantage, driving deeper into Carter's lines. "Sir!" One of Carter's lieutenants grabbed his arm. "The Railway Commission papers. Someone's riding east with them." Carter's grief transformed into rage. "Take half the men. Hunt them down." He turned his fury toward the wagon where Thomas sheltered. "The rest of you, burn him out!" Oil lamps shattered around Thomas's position, flames spreading quickly across the dry wood. The heat became intense, smoke threatening to choke him. He had to move. A shadow appeared through the flames, Reeves, offering cover fire. "Consider my brother's debt paid, Blackwood." Thomas sprinted from the burning wagon to an alley, bullets churning the dirt at his heels. He could hear hoofbeats thundering east, Carter's men pursuing Sarah and Davidson. They needed more time. "You've lost, Carter," Thomas called out, reloading his rifle. "Your son, your men, your secrets, all gone up in smoke." "Nothing's lost while I'm breathing." Carter's voice was raw with hatred. "I built this empire. Me. Not my weak fool of a son, not your self-righteous brother, not these backwater thugs." More explosions rocked the town as Carter's men used their remaining dynamite. Buildings began to collapse, forcing Morrison's gang to fall back. The fire was spreading unchecked now, threatening to consume all of Shadow Creek. Thomas spotted old Pete trying to rescue books from the church, Deputy Hayes helping wounded townspeople escape. This had to end before more innocents paid the price. "You want me, Carter?" Thomas stepped into the street, rifle ready. "Here I am. Just you and me. Or are Chicago crime lords too civilized for frontier justice?" Carter emerged from the smoke, his expensive suit dusty and torn, a Colt Army revolver in his hand. The same model Thomas had used to execute deserters during the war. "You think you know justice?" Carter spat. "I've bought and sold better men than you, judges, governors, generals. They all bend if you know where to push." "My brother didn't bend," Thomas said quietly. "That's why you had him killed. Your brother was a fool who thought papers could change the world. The world changes with blood and gold, Blackwood. Always has." They faced each other in the burning street, surrounded by the ruins of their private war. Morrison's men had pulled back to the south, Reeves's gang to the north. Even the remaining Carter mercenaries stood silent, watching. "1 shot," Thomas offered. "Winner takes all." Carter's answering smile was pure venom. "Like your duels in the war? The famous Deadeye Blackwood, who never missed?" Only one way to find out. The Chicago crime lord's hand tightened on his Colt. "My empire against your life seems like a fair trade." Thomas thought of James, of Maria, of all the others whose graves had paved Carter's road to power. "On 3? 1, Carter began, his voice steady. 2, Thomas answered, feeling the familiar calm settle over him. Before 3 could be spoken, both men moved. 2 shots shattered the night. For a moment, both men stood motionless in the burning street, smoke swirling around them like ghostly witnesses to this final duel. Carter's bullet had torn through Thomas's left shoulder, a clean shot that would have killed if his target hadn't shifted at the last instant. Thomas's round struck lower, finding its mark in Carter's gut, a soldier's shot meant to incapacitate rather than kill instantly. The Chicago crime lord stumbled backward, his expensive suit darkening with blood. You missed," he gasped, almost laughing. "The great Deadeye Blackwood missed my heart. Wasn't aiming for it." Thomas kept his rifle trained on Carter as he approached. "Quick death's too good for men like you. I want you to live long enough to face justice." "Justice?" Carter coughed wetly, falling to his knees. "Look around you, fool. This is justice. Fire and blood. The only kind that matters in places like this." Through the flames, Thomas could see riders approaching from the east. A dozen men in badges led by Sarah and Davidson. The Railway Commission's marshals had arrived at last. "Surrender!" The lead marshal's voice boomed across the burning town. "By order of the United States government." Carter's remaining men threw down their weapons, their professional discipline crumbling in the face of federal authority. Morrison's gang melted away into the night, while Reeves and his survivors surrendered with surprising dignity. "It's over," Thomas told Carter, who was still trying to stand despite his wound. "Your empire ends here." "Nothing ends," Carter snarled, blood staining his teeth. "There'll be others, always are. Men who understand that civilization is built on bodies and broken dreams." His hand moved suddenly, a derringer appearing from his sleeve. Thomas's rifle cracked one final time. Carter fell backward, a neat hole in his forehead replacing the sneer. Deadeye Blackwood's reputation would remain untarnished. Sarah reached him first as he sagged against a burned-out storefront. "You're hit," she said, already examining his shoulder. "Had worse at Gettysburg." Thomas winced as she probed the wound. "The papers. Safe with the commission." Davidson appeared, helping him stand. "They're already telegraphing Chicago. Carter's whole organization will be exposed by morning." Old Pete shuffled up, surveying the destruction. "Shame about the town," he wheezed. "Though I suppose undertakers don't go hungry in places like this." "Shadow Creek will rebuild," the lead marshal announced. "Without gang control this time. The railway's coming. Legitimate business. Legitimate opportunities." Thomas nodded tiredly. James would have liked that. Sarah finished bandaging his shoulder. "What will you do now?" "There's a small town in Colorado," Thomas said slowly. "Needs a sheriff who knows the difference between law and justice. Figure I've had enough of serving drinks." "They might need a doctor too," Sarah suggested, her hand finding his. "And a gunsmith," she added, glancing at Davidson. "Heard they've got a nice church," Davidson agreed. "Better than this one, anyway." He looked at the burned-out shell of Shadow Creek's house of worship. The marshals began organizing the prisoners, including the surviving Carter men. Reeves caught Thomas's eye as they led him past. "My brother died clean, at least. In battle. Not like this." He nodded toward Carter's corpse. "War makes its own justice," Thomas replied. "Peace has to work harder at it." As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of Shadow Creek, Thomas stood with Sarah and Davidson, watching the prisoners being led away. Maria's cross still hung around his neck, a reminder that some debts could never be fully paid, only honored. "Colorado, then?" Sarah asked softly. Thomas smiled, feeling the weight of the past finally beginning to lift. Colorado, where the air's clean and the shots are straight. And the justice is just, Davidson added. We'll make sure of that, Thomas promised, thinking of James, of Maria, of all the others whose deaths had led to this moment. Together. The sun rose higher, burning away the smoke that had choked Shadow Creek. Somewhere to the west, a new town waited for a chance at real justice, and Thomas Blackwood, no longer just a saloonkeeper, no longer just a sharpshooter, was ready to give it to them. The marshal's arrival brought more than just law to Shadow Creek. It brought questions. As the sun climbed higher, more riders appeared, journalists from Chicago, federal investigators, and railway officials, all eager to unravel the web of corruption Carter had woven. Thomas watched from Sarah's clinic as she stitched his shoulder wound. Through the window, he could see the aftermath of the night's violence. Burned buildings, shattered glass, and the ever-present old Pete, measuring bodies for coffins. 27 dead, Davidson reported, entering with fresh bandages. Mostly Carter's men, but we lost some townspeople too. Reverend Kane, 3 of Morrison's boys who switched sides at the end, and he hesitated. Maria, Thomas finished quietly. She'll get a proper marker, this time, one with her real name. Sarah tied off the last stitch. The marshals found something in Carter's coat. Letters addressed to your brother. Thomas's hand tightened on the edge of the examination table. What kind of letters? Warnings, mostly. Telling him to back off the investigation. The last one. Davidson pulled out a crumpled paper. It was dated 3 days before Fort Collins. Read it, Thomas said, though his eyes suggested he already knew the contents. Davidson unfolded the letter carefully. Mr. Blackwood, your persistence has become problematic. While your commitment to justice is admirable, you fail to understand the natural order of progress. Railways aren't built on dreams but on pragmatic choices. Your wife and son need not share the cost of your idealism. Consider this a final courtesy. Thomas stood, ignoring Sarah's protests about his wound. He knew. James knew they were coming, but he still tried to get the evidence out. He succeeded, Sarah reminded him softly. The papers we sent to Fort Henry. They're already being telegraphed to Washington. Carter's entire network is unraveling. A commotion outside drew their attention. Morrison was being led to a prison wagon, his Confederate dignity stripped away by iron shackles. Behind him, Reeves walked with his head high, sharing a last look with Thomas as he passed. You were right, Reeves called out, about justice wearing many faces. My brother would have understood that, in the end. The lead marshal, a weathered man named Cooper, approached their group. Mr. Blackwood will need your formal testimony, and there's the matter of your own colorful history. His actions were in service of justice, Sarah interjected quickly. Cooper raised a calming hand. Which is why I'm here with an offer, not arrest papers. We're establishing a new federal marshal's office in Colorado Territory, looking for men who understand the difference between law and justice. I'm done killing for causes, Thomas replied. Even good ones. Not asking you to kill, asking you to build something, a place where men like Carter can't sink their roots. Cooper gestured at the ruins of Shadow Creek, where this kind of story doesn't have to repeat. Davidson cleared his throat. Colorado's got a need for a good gunsmith, too. And a doctor, he added, glancing at Sarah. Thomas touched Maria's cross, thinking of James, of all the debts paid and still owing. When do we leave? The train comes tomorrow. New track's already been laid. Ironically, part of Carter's expansion plans. Cooper smiled grimly. Sometimes justice has a sense of humor. As the marshal left, Sarah took Thomas's hand. You're not fully healed. Some wounds never are, he replied, but his voice had lost its edge of bitterness. But maybe that's not always a bad thing. Reminds us what we're building towards. Through the clinic window, they could see Shadow Creek's surviving citizens emerging from hiding, beginning the work of rebuilding. Old Pete had switched from measuring bodies to marking foundation lines for new buildings. Deputy Hayes, no longer afraid, was organizing volunteers to clear debris. Life goes on, Davidson observed. Even after nights like this. Especially after nights like this, Thomas corrected. James used to say that darkness just makes the dawn more noticeable. Sarah checked his bandage one final time. Colorado's a long way from here. Good, Thomas said, watching Carter's body being loaded into a simple pine box. No fancy Chicago coffin for the fallen king. Some distances need to be long. As evening approached, bringing cooler air and longer shadows, Thomas stood in the ruins of his saloon. The safe was empty now, its contents spread across telegraph wires to a dozen cities. But beneath the floorboards, he found one last bottle of the good whiskey, survived the fire somehow. He shared it with Sarah and Davidson as they watched the sun set on Shadow Creek. Tomorrow would bring a new beginning, a chance to build something better. But tonight was for remembering. The costs paid, the lessons learned, and the fine line between justice and vengeance that every person must walk in their own way. The morning train to Colorado wouldn't arrive until noon, leaving Thomas with one last piece of unfinished business in Shadow Creek. In the pre-dawn light, he walked to the cemetery where Maria lay buried, her grave now properly marked with both her name and her courage. "He'll want revenge," Sarah said, appearing beside him like a ghost. "Billy Carter's younger brother in Chicago. They say he's worse than his father." "Let him come," Thomas replied, laying a wild rose on Maria's grave. "Some lessons need to be taught more than once." Davidson joined them, carrying a telegram. "Word from Fort Henry. The Railway Commission's expanding their investigation. Carter's network went deeper than anyone guessed. Judges, politicians, even a governor." "James knew," Thomas said quietly. "That's why he split up the evidence. One piece here, one there, all across the territories. Like pieces of a map." Speaking of maps, Davidson handed him another paper. "Our new posting in Colorado, a town called Redemption Valley." Sarah raised an eyebrow. Subtle. 10 days' ride from Chicago, Thomas noted. Far enough to start fresh, close enough to see trouble coming. A rider approached at speed. Deputy Hayes, his badge still shining despite everything. "Mr. Blackwood, Marshals found something at Carter's camp outside town. Something you need to see." They rode out together, the rising sun casting long shadows across the desert. Carter's men had established a base in an abandoned silver mine, complete with telegraph equipment and detailed maps of the territory. "Over here." Hayes led them deeper into the mine. In a small office carved from rock, they found a trunk filled with letters, photographs, and ledgers. Thomas lifted a photograph, studying it carefully. It showed a younger William Carter standing with 3 other men in Chicago business suits. "When was this taken?" 10 years ago, Cooper answered, emerging from the shadows. "Right after your brother started investigating railway corruption. Those other men? All dead now. Accidents, mostly." Sarah picked up a letter, her face paling as she read. "Thomas, this is from your father." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. "What?" "It's dated just before Antietam. He was working with Carter even then, using his position in the Army to influence railway contracts." She handed him the letter with trembling fingers. Thomas read it slowly, each word burning into his memory. His father, Colonel Samuel Blackwood, had been feeding Carter information about railway competitors, using the chaos of war to help build Carter's empire. "James must have found out," Davidson said softly. "That's why he became a Railway Commission investigator. He was trying to right a family wrong." "And our father?" Thomas's voice was dangerously quiet. Cooper cleared his throat. "Died in a hunting accident 5 years ago. Though given what we know now..." "Carter's first murder," Thomas finished. "Tying up loose ends." Sarah touched his arm. "You couldn't have known." "No," Thomas agreed, carefully folding the letter. "But James did. He knew everything. About our father, about Carter, about how deep the corruption went, and he died trying to expose it all. The sins of the father, Hayes murmured. Stop at the son, Thomas said firmly. It ends with us here. Now. They emerged from the mine into full daylight. In the distance, smoke still rose from Shadow Creek's ruins, but already scaffolding was going up, new foundations being laid. The train to Colorado leaves in 2 hours, Cooper reminded them. Redemption Valley needs good people. Thomas looked at Sarah and Davidson and saw the same determination in their eyes. Then let's not keep them waiting. As they rode back to town, Thomas thought about family legacies, the ones you're born with and the ones you choose. His father had chosen corruption, James had chosen justice, and now the choice was his. The morning stage brought more news. Young Jack Carter had taken control of his father's Chicago operations, swearing revenge on his brother's killer. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today was about new beginnings, about turning the page on old sins and starting fresh. Redemption Valley waited, and with it a chance to build something his brother would have been proud of. The train whistle echoed across Shadow Creek, calling them to whatever fate lay ahead. The train to Colorado carried more than just passengers that day. It carried hope. Thomas watched Shadow Creek disappear into the distance, the town's reconstruction already underway. Old Pete had given them a proper send-off, complete with his usual gallows humor about measuring folks for beds, instead of coffins for a change. Telegraph from Redemption Valley. Cooper handed Thomas a message. The town's been without a marshal for 3 months. Gangs moving in from the north, miners causing trouble from the south. Sounds familiar, Davidson commented, checking his gun-making tools for the journey. Sarah studied a medical journal, already planning her new practice. At least this time we know what we're walking into. Thomas touched Maria's cross, then pulled out the letter from his father. The yellowed paper felt heavy with the weight of family sins. James would have liked Redemption Valley. The name alone would have made him smile. Your brother started something, Cooper said. Exposing Carter's empire, showing how deep corruption can root itself. The commission's already talking about establishing permanent offices in every territory. Through the train window, Thomas watched the landscape change, desert giving way to mountains. Each mile put more distance between them and Shadow Creek, between the past and whatever future awaited. Jack Carter won't let it go, Davidson warned. Word is he's even worse than his father, younger, hungrier. Let him come, Thomas replied, checking his Remington out of habit. Some men need to learn their father's lessons the hard way. Sarah closed her medical journal. And what lesson will you teach him? The same one his father learned too late, that some things can't be bought: justice, redemption, peace. He met her eyes. Love. The train whistle pierced the afternoon air as they crossed into Colorado territory. Cooper unfolded a map, showing them their destination. Redemption Valley sat nestled between 2 mountain ranges, a natural fortress that had protected it from the worst of the territory's violence. The town needs more than just a marshal, Cooper explained. Needs people willing to stand for something, build something lasting. Like Shada's evening approached, Sarah moved to sit beside Thomas. Your father's letter. Are you going to tell your motto Creek could have been? Davidson mused. Will be, Thomas corrected. Sometimes the ground has to burn before new growth can take root. Her? She deserves to know the truth. About him, about James, about all of it. He watched the sun setting behind distant peaks. But some truths need time to heal before they can be spoken. The train curved around a mountain pass, revealing their first glimpse of Redemption Valley below. The town sprawled across the valley floor, its church steeple rising above wooden buildings and busy streets. Mines dotted the surrounding hills, their entrance lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Home, Sarah said softly, taking his hand. Home, Thomas agreed. Then, noticing Davidson's expression, all of us. Cooper stood, gathering his papers. Marshal's office is yours in the morning. Town council's eager to meet their new lawman and his deputies. Deputies. Davidson raised an eyebrow. Can't build something lasting alone, Thomas said. James taught me that. Every person has a part to play. As the train descended into Redemption Valley, Thomas thought about legacy, not the one his father left, stained with corruption and betrayal, but the one James had died protecting, the one he would help build in this new place. The last rays of sunlight caught Maria's cross, making it shine like a promise. Shadow Creek had been about justice, about settling old debts. But Redemption Valley? That would be about something more. Ready? Sarah asked as the train slowed for its approach. Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of his past lightening with each passing moment. Ready. The train whistle echoed through Redemption Valley, announcing not just new arrivals, but new beginnings. Thomas Blackwood, brother, soldier, avenger, and now marshal, stepped onto the platform of his future. Some said justice was blind, but Thomas knew better. Justice saw everything, remembered everything, and sometimes, if you were lucky, it offered a chance at redemption. He intended to make the most of his time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.